What is up, my telemetry babes? So welcome back to Basic EKG episode 6 with your girl Angel. So today we'll be learning about second degree heart blocks. So second degree heart blocks is when the electrical signal between your atria and your ventricles can intermittently fail. But guess what? There's two different types of second degree heart blocks. The first one is Mobitz I, aka wenckeback, and Mobitz II classical. Yes, I definitely said there's two different types, so buckle up your seatbelt, babes, because we have a lot of information to go over. So when it comes to Mobitz I, wenckeback, as the electrical impulses travel to the AV nodes, each one is delayed a little longer than the previous one, and they can eventually drop. So when it comes to Mobitz II, classical, that's when the AV nodes selectively allow some beats to get to the ventricles while others are blocked. So take a look at these examples, and then we'll get into how we can identify them. Okay, so now that we know the definition of wenckeback and classical second degree heart block, let's get into the hallmarks of how to identify it. So let's first go over wenckeback. Wenckeback, there should always still be an upright P wave. It should not be upside down. If you're looking at the QRS, it still should be 12 seconds and below, so it shouldn't have a wide QRS. I'm not saying that it could not have a wide QRS, but most of the time it does not. The QTC or the QT, most of the time you can't measure it, because a lot of the times when I've seen wenckeback on the monitor, the rhythm is a little bit irregular, but that's not always the case. It can be regular at times. You just have to make sure you're looking at the P wave. So the P wave with wenckeback, think of this when you're trying to find it. With the P wave, it will be longer, and then it will eventually drop. And when I say drop, it means that you won't be able to identify it. Okay, so we can look at this rhythm for an example of wenckeback. I kind of feel like my book doesn't have the best example for wenckeback, but this one will have to do. So this one actually has a 2-to-1 ratio, but if we're not looking at the 2-to-1 ratio, you can see how this P wave is close, and then it gets longer and longer. It doesn't show it dropping, but eventually with wenckeback it does drop, so just remember that. All right, so identifying classical heart block or Mobitz II, whichever you want to call it. So the P waves will definitely be upright. The QRS will be consistent, and the QRS should definitely have a 0.12 seconds and below measurement. I'm not saying that it couldn't have a wide QRS, but most of the time it does not. If you look here, it says regularity depends on the conduction ratio. A lot of times when I have seen second degree heart block classical on the monitor, it has been regular. I've actually never seen it irregular, but obviously it can be. So when you're looking at the P waves, you will notice that classical always has more P waves than the QRS. So if you look at this one has a 2-to-1 ratio, and with the P waves, they always march out. So the closer one will be the same measurement, and it goes for the longer one. It will be the same measurement across the board. That is the key to looking at second degree heart block. Just make sure you're marching out your P waves to see. But as soon as you see more P waves than QRS, you should automatically think like, okay, this is probably classical. Just make sure you march it out to see if they have the same measurement. Now, if you see on each one of these P's, it's a 0.28. I want you guys to look at this one. This one has a 3-to-1 ratio. It is still a second degree heart block classical. The P's march out as well. You have to make sure you're marching out your P's to make sure that it's a second degree, because if the rhythm has more P waves than QRS's, but the P's are not marching out, then it's a totally different rhythm. All right, so the difference between wenckeback and classical is the P wave. With wenckeback, as you know, the P wave will gradually get longer. And with classical, it has more P waves than the QRS, and the P waves will march out. They will have the same measurement. To remember winky bach, think of this saying. As I said, longer drop, then you have winky bach. If some P's just don't get through, then you have Mobitz II. I know it rhymes, and that's how I've always remembered it. So that's how you guys are going to remember it. All right, telemetry babes. So let me leave you with one last gem before we get into the pop quiz of how to remember winky bach and classical. So with winky bach, the P wave and the QRS are still married, but the P wave starts staying out later and later each night. So I guess he thinks it's okay not to come home. And girls, you know we cannot be having that. So with classical, the QRS is really upset with her husband, so she starts seeing more P waves. But she always sees her special P at the same time each night. Now, if you guys remember that, you will have no problem identifying winky bach and classical. Now let's get into the pop quiz.